Secretary mentioned the Federal Protective Service, or FPS. We were established in 1971 as part of the General Services Administration with the responsibility for protecting federally owned buildings and property. FPS was transferred to the Department of Homeland Security in 2002 as part of the Homeland Security Act. And like the Secretary mentioned, we're responsible for the protection of public buildings and grounds that are owned, occupied, or secured by the federal government. Since May 28th, just to give you some background, we've observed over 425 demonstrations and 260 attacks at federal facilities across the country. These attacks include bullets fired at federal facilities, arson, and objects thrown through windows. Actually, on May 29th, at a federal facility in Oakland, California, during a pretty violent demonstration, 2 of our protective security officers were shot in a drive-by shooting. One of those protective security officers, Pat Underwood, died of his injuries. As you're probably aware, in Portland, the Multnomah County Justice Center has been under attack by violent demonstrators for the last 52 days. They actually paint, that facility is painted every morning. It's been painted about 47 times in the last 52 days. Directly adjacent to the Justice Center, on one side to the north, is the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building. It's one of our federal facilities we protect. And to the south is the Hatfield United States Courthouse, which has been a primary target of recent attacks. I want to highlight what took place over the last 24 hours. This has been a recurring issue in Portland. So typically between the hours of 6 p.m. and 11 p.m., see peaceful, a normal demonstration that you might see, a march, social advocacy. In FPS, we deal with about 900 of those a year. It's a pretty simple process. We coordinate with the group. We provide an area for them to do their demonstration. And then once they're done, we clean up and they go home. 900 a year, 99.9 of those are peaceful. But last night at midnight, violent demonstrators blocked the streets around the Hatfield Courthouse, the Justice Center we mentioned earlier, and the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building. So the streets were blocked. At 12:55 a.m., we observed someone taking pictures of the water intake system at the Edith Green Federal Building. Later that night, a Twitter user tweeted, "So we can now shut off the water to the buildings the feds are staying in to make it a nightmare for them." At 1:20, protesters were beginning to bang on the walls of the Hatfield Courthouse. And I think if you've seen images of that, we've got plywood on the front of that. We did paint it with paint that can't catch on fire. So demonstrators were banging on those walls trying to tear the plywood off. A short while later, protesters were kicking the main doors of the courthouse and shining lasers at officers. About 20 minutes later, a fire was reported at what used to be the elk statue in the middle of the city park across the street from the Hatfield Courthouse. This is an area where violent demonstrators typically are meeting at nighttime. A short while later, the group has grown increasingly violent and aggressive. The plywood protecting the Hatfield Courthouse was taken down, and a window was broken while protesters were attempting to breach the courthouse. Several hard objects, including canned food and glass bottles, were thrown at our officers who were out to move them. Protesters advanced towards, engaged the officers again, throwing water bottles and other hard objects, fireworks, and using lasers. We had talked about, you've seen the green lasers that are being used out there. We have 3 officers who currently have eye injuries, and they may not recover sight in those eyes from those laser attacks. We have purchased anti-laze glasses, if you will. These are glasses that the officers are wearing now to prevent those eye injuries. At 3:29 this morning, the protesters smashed the glass of the courthouse with a fire extinguisher and attempted to throw commercial-grade fireworks inside the courthouse through the broken glass. Once again, our teams went outside to push them away from the front of the Hatfield Courthouse. The teams faced significant resistance from the crowds. Fireworks and glass bottles were thrown at the officers, and protesters attempted to light a tree on fire directly in front of the Hatfield Courthouse. We did make a total of 7 arrests last night. 2 of those were for 18 U.S.C. 111, which is assault on a federal law enforcement officer. The other 5 were for misdemeanor charges of failure to comply with instructions or vandalism, but at a misdemeanor level. I do want to quickly discuss the uniforms that our officers are wearing out there, and I know Mr. Morgan has brought some examples of what his officers are wearing. This is typical. What I'm wearing is the typical FPS uniform that our officers are wearing in Portland. Because of the nature of the assignment they're working, they are wearing long sleeves. They wear an external vest carrier with their ballistics vest inside. The panels on the back, Police Homeland Security. The panels on the front, Police DHS. It has the name Williams. We are going to convert the name to their badge number because about 38 of our officers that are out there have been doxxed, and their personal information has been put online, and they wear a badge on the front. Next photo, please. So, we've got some CBP officers out there assisting us with our performance of our duties. This is their typical uniform. Mr. Morgan will get into more detail on that later. But it's a standard uniform. It is more tactical, but it's the standard uniform that these teams wear day to day. And next slide, please. And this is the ICE Special Reaction Team officers. Same type of uniform, camouflage, but you can see the police panels in the front and the back, the SRT, and then their badge or their patch on the side there. Mr. Morgan, thank you.
The CBP's role with respect to what's happening in Portland is really straightforward. As part of the Department of Homeland Security, CBP is there to support FPS. And you heard with respect to their primary mission to defend a federal property. And as this country's largest law enforcement organization in the United States, we have a considerable amount of highly trained tactical units that provides an immediate response capability with respect to a wide, vast array of high-risk incidents. And they are highly and specialized. They received high training and specialized training in skills and tactics. We have our SRT, we call our Special Response Team, and that's the tactical unit that's attached to our Office of Field Operations. In addition to that, as I'm sure everyone's heard the past few days, BORTAC. That's our specialized tactical team that's assigned to our United States Border Patrol. These agents and officers are among the most highly trained agents and officers that we have within CBP, and that includes training in riot control. In fact, BORTAC was established in 1984 precisely to respond to riot control in detention facilities. The Special Response Team of OFO that I mentioned, they have an extensive experience with respect to responding to massed protests and riots at our land ports of entry, and they've been doing that for a very long time. In addition to that, BORTAC and SRT, these teams are dispatched to help local, state, and federal law enforcement organizations throughout the United States with respect to a variety of law enforcement operations. They've been doing this for decades. A couple of things, too, that I want to foot stomp on that the Secretary said, and both Deputy Director Klein. With respect to the arrest you've seen, specifically with respect to the units BORTAC that you've seen out there in the past few days. I want to make sure everybody understands that these arrests are highly coordinated within the incident command there at Portland. FPS has the lead, and as Deputy Klein said, there are a multitude of agencies that are there. We're one entity that's there. Every single arrest made is coordinated within that unified command, and they are narrowly targeted. And they're done so in accordance with established procedures and authorities, as the Secretary mentioned. For example, as already been mentioned, individuals who are with intent, willfully, arming themselves with weapons, they come there each and every night, they, with intent, arm themselves with a barrage of weapons with the intent to destroy federal property and seriously injure federal law enforcement officers. Those are the individuals that we're talking about. So when you see a CBP BORTAC agent or a SRT officer that is out there, they are doing so in that very targeted fashion to go after somebody that has committed a federal crime. And that very narrow target approach, what I'm talking about specifically, are those who have actually intentionally harmed a federal officer. So, and they're doing so while these agents and officers are protecting the federal property. So we are, in that case, we will make a targeted arrest based on probable cause. And that includes, as the Secretary said, even if that subject goes off the property. It just makes common sense. We're not going to allow somebody to walk up to the federal property, assault a federal officer or agent, and because then they walk off federal property, then we're going to say, oh, we can't go arrest you. Well, that doesn't make sense. Of course we're going to arrest you, and we have the authority to make that arrest, and we will continue to do that. So what this means is we're not patrolling the streets of Portland as been falsely reported multiple times in the past few days. I'd like to address two other persistent questions that come up. First, unmarked vehicles. Look, I've been in law enforcement for almost 3 decades. The use of unmarked vehicles is a standard procedure, a standard practice among every local, state, and federal law enforcement agency in this country, actually in the world. It's nothing new. But it's especially important under these circumstances. Every one of us known, every one of us in the past few weeks has seen what have they been doing. I call these individuals criminals, not the peaceful protesters, but the individuals, again, with intent that are going to go out and actually target marked vehicles. We've seen it time and time again. We've seen marked patrol vehicles in the last few weeks among a variety of cities through this country on fire. We all know about the story in New York where an incendiary device was actually thrown inside a marked vehicle while there were uniformed officers inside the vehicle. So yeah, I think not only is it a common practice among law enforcement, but also in these circumstances, it makes sense to use an unmarked vehicle. Not only first and foremost for the protection of the officers and agents doing their job to protect federal property and arresting criminals, but also for the protection of the public. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is the uniform markings. There has been a tremendous amount of false information out there. I've seen news reporting after news reporting, tweet after tweet saying, quote, unidentified, masked stormtroopers. Again, I want to foot stomp on the Secretary said. It is offensive to refer to these dedicated men and women that are out there as law enforcement professionals to make that reference. It is disgusting. And it's also a lie. As we can see, we've shown you time and time again. So you saw the markings that Deputy Director Klein put out. I wanted to blow that up to show you. Our BORTAC agents, for example, this is the identification every single one of them has on their uniform. And this is a baseline. I wanted to bring a real live version. This is what they're wearing. This is a real live version of what they're wearing. And this is a baseline of all the different identifications that they have. So first and foremost, you see clearly marked that they are part of the Customs and Border Protection. The second line of marking is it shows the component within CBP that they're associated with. And this instant, Border Patrol. Clearly police. It's marked on the front and the back. Clearly, every single agent. In addition to that, they have a unique identifier. Deputy Director Klein said he doesn't have his officers wear name tags because they're being doxxed. That's exactly right. That's another thing that's absolutely disgusting. So they're not only jeopardizing the lives of the agents, but they're also jeopardizing the lives of their families as they're putting out their home information and they're suggesting that individuals go to their homes. So yes, I, as the acting commissioner, have authorized and supported removing their names from their uniform. Instead, what we have, though, is a personal identifier. So we have that, so we can identify, and we have each identifier associated with a specific name, so we have all that information internally. And we'll share that with the appropriate entities when it's necessary. Our SRT teams, it's the same thing, right? Clearly identified. Different color uniform, clearly identified. So I hope that puts to rest the lies and the false rumors about that they're not properly marked. The last thing that I'll mention about this as well is there's been some information out there about how they identify themselves. You will find in each and every instance when we approach somebody who we have probable cause, who has committed a federal crime, we do identify ourselves as either police or a federal agent. That's the truth. Thank you.